in the early centuries of the church is kind of fuzzy. The history is kind of fuzzy. We don't know exactly the history. Let's say the first 8 centuries. Although there's some evidence that there may have been receiving in the hand, although that's not certain, but there was never receiving in the hand itself. There was always like a cloth over the hand. You never actually touched the host. You touch the cloth, which then went to your mouth, but you never touched the host. Because you see your hands aren't consecrated. Only your priest's hands are consecrated. Only he can touch God. Well, beginning in the 9th century, as the church saw all the abuses that were occurring, particles would fall from the host onto the ground, depending on how the hosts were made. Particles would fall, that's God falling on the ground. And so from the 9th century to the 20th century, that's over 1,000 years, 1,200 years, it was absolutely forbidden for anyone to touch the host except the priest, because his hands are consecrated. He's a priest. Even in the period the time of the Protestant revolt, let's say the 16th century, starting with Luther and Calvin and others, Catholics always received communion kneeling on the tongue. This is very interesting. Calvin is writing a letter to another fellow revolutionary in Switzerland named Martin Bucer. He's not as famous as Calvin or Luther, but he was one of them. And he says in his letter, he says in this letter, by the way, Calvin quotes this in his book. He quotes the actual letter. But Calvin says to his friend, mind, they reject the Eucharist. They don't believe that it's really Christ. It's just a piece of bread, just a symbol. And Calvin says to his friend in Switzerland in a letter, if we can get the Catholics to take communion in the hand, standing, within one generation they'll no longer believe it's Christ. Exact words. Think about that for a second. Why would you do in the 20th century what the Protestants wanted us to do in the 16th century, who deny the Eucharist? It makes no sense at all. Guess who's in the mix right here? Clearly the devil. Now, to give you again a brief history, this is kind of complicated, but in 1969, it's a long time ago, 69, Pope Paul VI, just 4 years after the council, 5 years after the council, no, 4 years, I'm sorry. Council ended in 4 years, 65, 4 years later. He writes this document, which he did very reluctantly. And it was an indult, which means you have to get special permission from your bishop to do this. He was concerned that in countries like Belgium and Germany and Switzerland and Holland, the bishops were already allowing the people to receive communion in the hand, Catholics. He was alarmed by that. But he's afraid to put his foot down and say, stop it, because he thought there would be a schism then. There would be a split in the church. He wanted to avoid a schism. So he allowed it to go on, even though he did not want to, because he understood human nature, and he knew about Calvin. He knew what the Protestants said. He was very reluctant. So he said, okay, you have to get special permission to do this, but the norm remains communion on the tongue, not in the hand. That's the norm. Again, it's just been reversed today. It's been reversed. And then he also said that you could not change the church's teaching regarding how you receive communion, that is, from the tongue to the hand, unless 2/3 of all your bishops agree. 2/3 have to agree, otherwise you can't do it. At first, and this was the late 60s, early 70s, at first they could not get it 2/3. Bishops said, no, we're not doing that. That's a big mistake. Can't do that. It's going to lead to a loss of faith, a lot of irreverence, etc. But due to the machinations and the behind-the-scenes efforts of one Cardinal Bernardine from Chicago, notoriously liberal, notoriously, he pushed this very hard behind the scenes. He even went to retired bishops to get them to sign on. Finally, after a long effort, he got 2/3 number in 1977, and that's when it was changed. Now you're allowed to receive the other way. Well, pretty soon it became universal. It was like norm now. Now the rest just disappeared. But Paul VI understood this was a very serious thing because it could very well lead to a large loss of faith. And again, it's not so much that people are sort of deliberately rejecting Christ. It's that The church understood human nature. The Protestant understood human nature better than we do. That when everybody's handling something, they're going to be casual about it. And they're going to be irreverent about it. And they're going to gradually lose their faith. And that is exactly what has happened. To the T. When you do polls now, how many Catholics believe in the real presence? This has maybe changed slightly, but I don't think it's probably changed a lot. 30%. That means 7 out of 10 Catholics who still go to church, mind you, I'm not talking about ones that just stopped going, do not believe that what they receive in communion is really Christ. It's just a piece of bread, just a symbol. It means that 70% of Catholics are Protestant in their thinking. I mean, they're baptized Catholics, they call themselves Catholics, but in terms of their actual thinking, they're thinking like Protestants, are they not? That's exactly what they're doing. This was not by accident. This was, I'm afraid, by design. I think it was by certain people. I'm not going to point any fingers. I can mention some names, but I won't. But I think this should never have happened. And until we get back to what should never have changed in the first place, I think our young priests understand this. The young priests, they get it. Because they were trained properly in the seminaries. They were properly trained. Another thing I'll mention is the priests facing the people for Mass, for the sacrifice. That again is a total innovation that was never done before in the history of the church, mind you, in 2,000 years. Never done before, until 50 years ago. All of a sudden the priests started turning to people. No. When you offer sacrifice, you face the east, ad orientem. Now, if you can't physically face the east, let's say the way the church is built, you face what's called the liturgical east. The liturgical east would be the tabernacle in the middle of the church. So the priest, you're the people, you're in the pews, the priest represents Christ, you're the body of Christ, he turns and he faces God. He doesn't face you. Who was the first person to say the priest should face the people for Mass? 1526? Martin Luther. I can prove it. Why would we do what Martin Luther wants us to do? He denied the Mass. He rejected, because it's just a meal. When you have a meal, you face your guests, but when you offer a sacrifice, you face God. You turn toward God. Now, it's interesting, in the early church, before you had churches, you're being persecuted. So you had a home church, a church in your house. They would, what the Catholics would do in hiding, because they were in hiding, unless they get caught and be killed, they put a cross on the eastern wall of their home. When the priest would say Mass, the priest would be at the head, they would be behind him, they'd all be facing the same direction to offer the Mass. If you notice cemeteries, traditional ones, why are they always facing east? Because Christ will come back from the east. At the second coming of Christ, in the Bible, the east is always the place of God. God will come back because the sun rises in the east. When Christ comes at the second coming, he will come from the east. And all will rise with him. And he presents his kingdom to his Father in heaven. The east is a sacred direction. Again, if you can't physically be facing east, then you do what's called liturgical east, which is, see, that's why it's so important to have the tabernacle in the middle. Because now you're facing Christ in the liturgical east, and you're facing God with Christ, and you're kind of like moving toward Christ, or toward God. Christ is leading you, you're following Christ, he's leading you toward God as you go east. You see? All that should never have changed. It just, I can assure you the bishops of Vatican II would have been shocked to see that change. But what does that do again? It Protestantizes things, doesn't it? You're facing the people you're not supposed to face, not for sacrifice. You face God. Even among pagans, I can prove this historically. Even in pagan religions, when their priests, or priestesses would offer sacrifice to their many gods, or they would always turn toward their gods, wherever they thought, well, they're over here, or they're over there, but never toward their people, because you don't do that when you offer a sacrifice. You face your God. That too, again, and our new priests know that. They know that. Even Rome, by the way, St. Peter's. This is the fact. I don't think they do this anymore, but historically they did this. The way it's built, it's facing east. But the Holy Father, when he says Mass, he faces the people in front of him. He's behind the altar and he's facing it. They say, why are they doing that? Well, guess what? Historically, what they would do? At first, at the beginning of the Mass, yes. Pope's there, we're in our chairs, we're facing him. When the Eucharistic prayer began, guess what the people would do? They'd turn their backs on the Pope, and they would face the door, east. That's what they would do. You always face east, if you can. Again, that has been totally suppressed, and our young priests know that. They want to change things the way they were and the way they're supposed to be, but they're biding their time. But that's the way the Mass... See, then the priest is no longer the center of attention. He's not an actor putting on a show. He's absorbed in what he's doing because he represents Christ, and he's facing the same direction with the people toward God. You see, then he's like absorbed in what he's doing. But when you become the center of attention, you have to kind of put on a show. Look at me. And not all priests do that, but some do. Some do. They shouldn't, but they do. We know that. So no, it should never, the communion rails, they should never have been removed. There's no reason for that. What would be the possible? Well, there's another line you hear. Ridiculous line. They'll say, oh, well, the communion rail is a barrier between God and the people. Again, theological nonsense. Guess what? The sacred and the profane always are separate from each other. You look at any religion, I don't care what it is, every religion, they separate the profane from the sacred. You know what profane means literally? Outside the temple. Outside the temple. There's certain things you keep outside the temple, which is the sanctuary of the church. The sanctuary is the most holy part of the church. It's where the altar is, where the sacrifice takes place. That's why there's a communion rail to separate you from the sanctuary. Think of the temple in Jerusalem. Could anybody walk in the temple? No. Only the priest could go into the Holy of Holies once a year to offer incense and sacrifice before the Ark of the Covenant. Why? Because it's the holiest place, and he's an ordained priest. That's why. In fact, they were so strict about it. Maybe I don't know if you know this, but if he went into the temple, offer sacrifice on the Day of Atonement, which they call Yom Kippur, once a year, they would tie a rope around his leg. This is fact. They'd tie a rope around his leg in case he died in there, because they couldn't go and get his body. So they had to pull it out. I don't think it happened very often, but let's say it did happen. Let's say he died in the Holy of Holies. Could they go in there and get his body? No, they couldn't. They had to pull it out, because only the priest could go into the Holy of Holies. See what happens, though, when you no longer have a demarcation between the profane and the sacred? You kind of blur the distinction. Everybody's running around in the sanctuary. There's no distinction anymore. It's just like all blurred. A lot of churches are built that way now. There's no distinction. It's like, where does the sanctuary begin and the rest of the church end? I don't know. Communion rail wasn't the place of division. It wasn't you're trying to keep the people out. It's because you're reinforcing what's going on behind the communion rail, in the sanctuary. That's what you're focusing on. Again, so many of these things are, I don't blame the people. I really don't. I blame the leaders for not instructing the people. And some people get really, they get irritated. They say, oh, if you do this, you're trying to go back to when the church was before the council. No, we're not. We're actually trying to follow the council for a change. We're trying to do what they actually said we should do. But they don't know. They think this is all backward and this is all, no, it's not. It's being faithful. And again, I say, our great hope for the renewal of the church is our younger priests. They all know this. They've been properly instructed, properly formed. We went through some fuzzy periods, in the 80s and 70s, some poor formation for our priests, poor formation, but since then it's really been changed for the better, and our younger priests get this all. And they would do it tomorrow if they could do it. They know that, and they would do it. So we have to pray that actually happens. So, anything else? Other question?
I was just going to ask,
yeah.
are there churches that are built or have been built since the Reformation, churches that don't face the east? Some of the churches
That do not?
Yeah, that do not face the east. I think we were talking about.
Well, I think most of the churches that have been built in the last 50 years don't even consider that when they build them. I very much doubt, and let's say again, for the sake of argument, you couldn't physically build a church facing east because of the property, you have no property regulation. The key is more liturgical east, I think. You certainly could have the tabernacle in the middle. That would not be a problem for any church. That's why people pleading, please bring the tabernacle back in the center of the church. Why was Christ banished? I mean, I remember he says one of his talks in here. He says he go to one parish somewhere. He didn't say where it was. He said, well, I want to pray before the Eucharist. Christ is, he's down the hallway in a room. He what? So he went down. He physically picked up the tabernacle, brought it back, and put it on the altar. He says, now I'm going to talk. Not until then. He's right there in front of me. I mean, physically took it and put it there. He said, why are you banishing him? He's the center of everything. Yeah, I think most of the churches built, at least around here, don't even consider that. I doubt it. I mean, I don't know if they even think about that. But they should, if they can. Just like cemeteries. I mean, you just go around this diocese and drive around, and you'll notice that. Many cemeteries, the tombstones face the east. That's not an accident. That was done by design. Because what? Christ will come from the east at the resurrection, and all will rise with him. That's why. That direction of east is critical, ad orientem, to the east. And again, if it's not the physical east, then the liturgical east, which would be, like I say, the tabernacle in the middle. But if you think about it, doesn't it make much more sense when you pray, when you offer the sacrifice of the cross to Christ, of Christ to God the Father, that you all be facing the same direction? God the Father, we're walking toward God the Father. Christ is leading us. In the person of the priest, and we're following him in the same direction. It makes much more sense than me facing you, which doesn't make any sense liturgically. And if you look at the Eastern Rite, we have 23 Eastern Rites in the Catholic Church. They're just as Catholic as we are, but they have to follow a different rite. And the Orthodox too, who are not new with us. You will go to any of their masses, you'll never see the priest facing the people, ever. They've never stopped doing what they're supposed to do, but they've been doing for 2,000 years. I mean, you go to a Maronite Mass, or you go to a Byzantine Mass, or an Orthodox Mass, it's all shrouded. I mean, you can't even see the priest practically. Everything is hidden. You know, it's all because there's a mystery there. You want to maintain the mystery. Even the Latin language, I think Latin adds a kind of mystery to what's going on. There's something mysterious about the language. Even if you don't understand it, when you listen to Gregorian chant, you may not know what the words mean, but you know there's something sacred about it. It just is. It's just in the music. And that's why it's supposed to be pride of place in the church. But it's not. Anybody else? Good questions. Thank you. Yes?
Going back to after communion behavior.
Yeah.
If you're not paying attention when you're praying after communion,
Yeah.
everybody's watching Father like a stoplight.
Yes.
As soon as he sits down, everybody sits back, and it's like,
I know.
what's the correct protocol?
I think you should just, when you go back to the pew, kneel and pray, and then if you wanna then sit while the priest. I mean, if he sat for an extensive period of time, it makes sense. You know, usually it's 20 seconds. He's out. You know, maybe half a minute at most. Now, if he sat down, it was for a good 2-3 minutes of silence. Then it would make sense maybe for you to sit down too. But given the way it's done, I would say just stay kneeling. You know, and then because usually it's just a rush job. I think most can. I mean, but really it shouldn't be. It should be, you know, and again, I'm not going to pick on any person or any priest or anything like that, because the priests, you know, we have to pray for our priests and pray that they're good models for us. But, you know, to me, it doesn't make any sense that you give Christ a couple, maybe less than a minute of a conversation, and yet you'd have plenty of time to talk outside the church with people about mundane things. It just doesn't seem at all just to God. It seems very unjust, I think. No, I would just keep doing what I was doing, because it's so quick. If it was longer, it'd be different. Yeah.
Well, in that same note, why is there a hymn always after communion?
They shouldn't do. I mean, if you can have your way with your communion ministers or community directors, I'll just say either play no music or play an instrumental, where there's no singing involved, so you people don't have to participate. Because I think people think, well, I better sing. Well, then if you're singing, then how are you talking to God? It's kind of hard to do the same, both at the same time. I would just request that they have instrumentals. That's what I would do. That would be a way of solving it. Or no music at all, just silence, but maybe something, just a quiet, in the background kind of, that would work, I think. You wouldn't have to have total silence. But I remember reading Patrick Madrid. You all know who Patrick Madrid is. I remember he tells a story about a Mormon friend that he had, and he said his Mormon friend would chastise him. He says, because he said, he says, you Catholics believe in the real presence, don't you? He says, yeah. And Patrick, yeah, that's the center of faith. He says, well, I've got some friends who are Catholic, and they don't act like they do. He said they're chewing gum before communion, they're talking on the way up and down. He says, they don't believe anything. They just think it's a piece of bread. He was embarrassed that his friends said that to him. He said, I apologize for them. He said, this is a good Mormon friend of his. He said, I apologize for them. He said, that's not appropriate behavior. So, but you have to keep working hard at it, and just keep plugging away, and eventually things will slowly come back around as they should never have. Like I say, Vatican II was a great council, necessary council for reform. Certain things had to be reformed, but it was not meant to be a revolution. And for some people, it was a revolution. And whenever you hear the phrase pre-Vatican II, you know you're dealing with someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. You know it. The church is not pre-Vatican II or pre-Vatican I or pre-Trent or pre-Nicaea. The church is the church is the church. It's always the same church no matter when the history happens to exist. But when people say that, they mean, well, we start over again after the council. No, we didn't. No, we did not. Don't believe it. Not for a second. Anyway, great questions, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for your attention and your attendance and coming. It was great. I always enjoy it. It's something good. Thank you. Thank you.